My name is Matt Sparazza.
I'm Father Sam Kachuba. Welcome to The Tangent. I like that you're just jumping in with the introduction to that. It's been a really nice shift
role.
and development. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's my role.
I'm going to jump in and take my role today as being just really happy to welcome our guest,
Yes,
Jason
please.
Evert.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah.
Now,
we interviewed your wife
we
a
want to
long
tell the
time
same
ago.
story.
Yeah, we do. Of course we do. She was one of our first guests when we first started this podcast. And to be honest, Matt and I weren't really sure if this was a thing, if we had any capacity for doing this. And somehow Kristalina Evert ends up on our list of people who's coming on the show.
Yeah.
And we were profoundly confused by all of this. And it was great. She was so much fun to have on the show. And not only that, but that was the day that I think you changed your Wi-Fi settings or something in the house to like automatically cut people off at a certain time. And so she was jumping on different devices to finish the interview with us. And it was great.
Sure
so
we hit 3 or 4 devices by the end
always
of
a
it.
challenge to maintain internet safety in a way that keeps our sanity.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It was
But
great
it's great
fun.
to have you coming to join us here. And now this is also a unique thing for us. Ordinarily, when we interview somebody, we just get to talk about something, but we actually have an upcoming event with you that we get to plug. And we don't often get to do that. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing when you come to the Diocese of Bridgeport to St. Rose of Lima Church in Newtown, Connecticut on October 10th.
Yeah, so we've got a presentation basically for the whole family, ages 13 and up. So whether you're a 8th grade kid, a high school student, college student, young adult, single, married couple, it's for everybody. And we've got 2 presentations. The first one's kind of on chastity and dating 101. I think a lot of young people today are really well versed in everything they're not supposed to do when they're in a relationship. Don't look at that and don't do this and don't do that. But they really don't know where to begin when it comes time to actually finding, building, and maintaining a relationship of lasting love. So it's kind of like marriage preparation when it should be happening, like a decade before the nuptials, instead of cramming for the test 6 months before the wedding day. So really just starting to teach them God's plan for human love through the lens of the theology of the body and chastity. After that presentation, there's a little bit of a break. Then we come back and we pivot from talking about sexuality as something you do to sexuality as something we are, male and female. And so we're going to take a deep dive into the whole gender question. How do we respond to this whole topic? If I've got a coworker who says they're trans, or a kid comes back from college and says they're non-binary and their pronouns are they, them, like what is a parent to do? And so we kind of look at that whole issue through a lens of compassion, but also truth. And then following that, we have a time of Eucharistic adoration for a half hour with the sacrament of reconciliation available. And so that way they don't just get some motivational speech and go home with some free books. They actually get to encounter Christ in the sacraments, and they can leave that night with their baptismal innocence restored. And so it's kind of a little miniature retreat for the whole family. And so it takes a couple hours, but it's just a kind of the time you need to detox from the contrary messages these kids are getting on a daily basis.
You had me at free books.
Yeah.
Now I'm glad that you mentioned that it's for the family context, because I've been thinking about, in preparation for this interview, I've been thinking about how and when to introduce these topics to my son. So my son's a baby; it's a while off, right? But
he's got to be able to like understand human speach and things like that
true.
first.
That's true.
That's
yeah,
a big thing.
cognitive powers are important for this conversation.
Yeah. Make sure he learns English, and then you can start.
Yeah. Okay. But one of the things that, like, my wife and I, when we go on walks, and we live in a neighborhood that has a lot of families, and we'll find ourselves saying, like, man, like, what happened to middle schoolers? When did middle schoolers start looking put together? And so I've kind of come to this realization that the time to introduce theology of the body might be earlier than I thought it was. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, at what age? Now, you said 13 and up, right? But is that the proper age that you start introducing theology of the body? Is it necessary to introduce elements earlier than that?
Oh, absolutely. Without a question. I mean, if you're waiting until 13 to introduce the theology of the body, you've just missed a decade of formation, because it's theology of the body isn't just like Catholic sex ed.
Right.
It answers a fundamental question like, who am I and how should I live?
Right.
And so you begin answering that as soon as they can understand speech of what does it mean that my body is a gift and I make a gift of myself to others. And I can do that through doing dishes and helping mom with the baby and things like that. And so there's great books out there. If you just Google like Theology of the Body books for kids, you'll find a ton of them. And these are great. You could read to 4, 5, 6-year-olds. And then when you're introducing them the concepts of modesty and privacy and things like that, then it's not like a bad body part, a dirty body part. It's like, no, the body's good. Your body isn't something dirty and bad and shameful. And so we're kind of building the foundation for the principles. But then when you get to the 13 age plus, they're wrestling with some cultural issues where we need to speak to them clearly in an age appropriate way in these subjects. And so that's why we kind of hold off on my content for like 13 and up, because they really need a clear message.
Fair enough.
On those things. So,
right. So,
Jason,
please, Sebastian.
So you used a word before that in these presentations that you give, it's only a few hours long, but it's time to detox. I really like that word, and I appreciate how it's being used here. But can you dig into what that means? Why is it so important for us to detox from some of these messages that the world's giving, especially in light of that need for formation throughout our whole lives to understand who we are and who we're created to be?
Yeah, I think of the gospel passage where our Lord says, come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest for a while. And you look at that passage, come away. He's not saying go away, like go, no deal here. Come away, meaning you're coming with me, and we're going to go to a place where we're away from all these distractions, and you're going to find some rest. And so that's what the evening is like. Let's go away for a while with him to encounter him, to discover our deepest aches. A friend of mine recommended just the other day a little meditation that John Paul II wrote on givenness. And he wrote it before he passed away during the year of the family in 1994, but it wasn't published in English till after his death. And it's just this beautiful little 13-page reflection on human love. And it's just absolutely beautiful. And as you're reading this thing, it's almost like he takes the deepest aches in your heart and then kind of holds them up with reverence in front of your face to kind of meditate on. And you look at it and it's like, it's so beautiful. Why would I want to settle for anything less in my life? And so that's the idea, is that this is not a time of shaming and blaming and scare tactics and you're going to get pregnant and die of an STD and go to hell. I mean, that approach has never, ever worked. I mean, if you think of any virtue you have, it's not because you're afraid of the alternative of not practicing that virtue. It's for the sake of love. Yeah. And so John Paul said chastity can only be thought of in association with the virtue of love. And so what we've got to do is detox them from this bogus idea the world gives them that chastity is somehow the enemy of love, that chastity will divide you, will rob you of spontaneity, when in reality, chastity is the only thing that makes true spontaneity possible, that you're actually loving someone for the good of them out of real tenderness, as opposed to some manipulative instinct that you have to use. And so we're really going to try to wed the virtue of chastity with our deep desire to love.
So in that, right, the central error the shaming? Is that what you would say the central error of the ideology is? Or is it more philosophical than that, and like the central error is a materialist approach to the body?
Yeah, well, St. John Paul II wrote a book called Love and Responsibility. And in it, he talked about we need to rehabilitate the word chastity. There's just so much negative baggage that is accumulated around that word. And he said it's come to the point where people just resent the message of chastity. And so instead of giving it its due place, that it deserves respect, we realize, okay, that demands a special effort of my will, but rather than actually exercise that will, what I can do instead is just demean the virtue itself so I can lightheartedly pass it by and prefer what's comfortable and convenient for me. And so there's a hedonism at the root. There's a subjective relativism about it. There's a utilitarianism about it, of like, I can judge how good something is by how much pleasure we all get out of it. And so there's a lot of philosophical faults at the root of today's hedonism. But I think the key that John Paul always kind of draws us back is the human being only deserves love. And so the opposite of love isn't to hate, it's to use the other person. And so what chastity does is it frees us from that selfish attitude to use so we can be free to love. And I think that's what resonates with these young people. I want freedom and I want love. And once they see that chastity offers them both, I think their hearts start to open to it.
Yeah, I mean that rings so true, right? Because like why do I mean, I'm thinking back on my own personal experience, and I know that the reasons that, like, not to examine my conscience on the air here, right? But
Go
anytime
ahead.
that I
That's
felt,
fine. We're all listening.
yeah, great, Father, I do not want this to be a confession, okay? But anytime that any like failure in chastity came about, it was because I felt restricted, you know? And so John Paul II, right, also proposed a freedom for excellence as opposed to a freedom of indifference, right? So
Mhm.
like that call to excellence in the virtue of chastity, which, you said that it was kind of decreased, right? The value of that virtue. Certainly not to go on top of you there, but I would even say that I think it's just totally been forgotten. Like, I don't think that
Mhm.
when I was growing up that I even knew what real chastity was. Like, I associated chastity with, uh, and correct me if I'm wrong here, like just chastity with purity, insofar as purity is not doing the bad thing. Is
Mhm.
that fair to say?
Yeah, it's seen as a no, just one
Yeah.
big holy no. That's what chastity is, and that's frankly not that appealing, because the
No, it
the
wasn't.
human body kind of asks for it's like an invitation to something, and when our answer is nope, 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 we just feel this tension because we feel like okay, that body deserves a resounding yes,
Right.
but we're responding to yes with lust instead of yes with love, so we need to explain what that looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that that's a key point here. So Matt, you're describing something that's even different from what I received, several
Hmm.
years before you did. When I was in high school, actually a lot to what you were just saying before, Jason, the message was often, don't do this, otherwise you'll get an STD and go to hell. The message surrounding chastity was not really at all positive. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion of the dignity of the person, the value of sexuality, the gift of self that can be made. And so there was a lot more, I think, fear kind of thrown in there. Whereas by the time, Matt, I think by the time you were coming of age, a lot
Hmm.
of that message had kind of shifted to just don't do this,
Yeah, I
with
mean,
nothing else really attached. Like, here's the rules, just follow them maybe. But I think what has been
yeah.
increasingly becoming more part of the conversation, Jason, is exactly the stuff that you do, which is to promote the full picture of all of this stuff. That
Mhm.
chastity as a virtue is a way of giving of ourselves, and it's a way of respecting and understanding and truly loving and valuing the other. And it's a way then of also discovering the truth of who we are, instead of being bound to either a fearful way of living or a completely self-centered way of living, which is what the world offers us.
Yeah, as you're speaking, what's echoing in my mind is Saint John Paul II and his love and responsibility talks about as we grow in this virtue of purity, it frees us to love. And the insight that he kind of points out is that even in marital love, a lot of times there's frigidity on the part of the woman towards the man who resents the man because he sees her as kind of more of just an outlet for his lust. Whereas if the man grows in this virtue of chastity, elsewhere in John Paul's writings, he talks about how Eve in the very beginning experienced all the peace of the interior gaze. That Adam, by the way that he looked at her with such reverence and respect, she could be naked without shame because he wasn't looking at her as something. And I think when a woman hears that, it resonates because women can tell, not just from close up, from 100 yards away, if a guy's looking at her, is some collection of body parts. And if he is, it kind of creates this restless vulnerability and resentment. Whereas if the man actually possesses purity of heart, she feels safe in his gaze. And when women hear that, it's like, ooh, yes, exactly. And John Paul even points out that this frigidity towards men, that's the result of their brutality towards you in the sexual sphere. John Paul says that's actually harder to overcome than the sexual drive itself, which is a
Mm,
profound insight. But when you hear John Paul talk about this, the way that if we can grow in purity and heart, we can bless our brides with this peace of the interior gaze. When a guy hears that, it's like, dude, I want to be able to do that. Like, I want to
Hmm.
be able to give my wife that peace. But how do I do that when I've been, looking at porn since seventh grade and I got these porn goggles and I don't even know how to look at a woman except through this lens of lust? And so John Paul provides just not this beautiful idealistic concept, but a pathway to work towards the way we can get there. And I think if we can lead in with the church's teachings on beauty instead of shame and guilt and fear and all that
Hmm.
stuff, this beauty of human love, I think we're more likely to kind of let go of the counterfeits that we tend to grasp onto, thinking they're going to be able to fulfill us, because we realize this isn't really what I want to begin with. I want something more
Hmm.
deep and beautiful. And I think that's what the church offers. But young people, unfortunately, rarely get to hear that vision.
Yeah.
So you know, is I'm hearing chastity and purity, and I'm kind of treating them synonymously, but I don't think I should be,
Mhm.
right? So is
Yeah.
chastity defined as seeing a person, seeing a subject instead of an object? But if that's what chastity is, what is purity? Like, how do we define that term?
Yeah. No, I think it's good to define our terms because the words abstinence, celibacy, chastity, and purity often kind of get all
Right.
commingled and mixed up and like celibate. Who would want to be celibate? So celibate is the state of not being married. That's what the word means.
Okay.
Abstinence means just not having sex. And so if you said that like Bob is abstinent, okay, like that didn't really tell you anything about Bob. I mean,
Right.
Bob might be a virtuous guy and waiting for marriage. Bob might not be able to find a date. Bob might have died 30 years ago. Like we don't really know
Right.
anything about Bob if
Death
you say
gets in
just
the
Bob
way all
Webster.
the time. All the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, but abstinence is just what you're not doing.
Right.
Now, chastity is a virtue that applies to your sexuality. And it's just so for anyone's state in life, whether they're married, single, religious, we've all got to practice chastity, which means we're using the gift of our sexuality according to our own state in life. And so that looks
Mm,
like one way for a married person, one person for a single, one person for the religious. And purity of heart, in a sense, enables us to live out this virtue. And so, of all those terms, celibacy, abstinence, purity and chastity to me seem the closest in terms of a single heartedness
mm,
towards loving God. And it doesn't mean that you don't have sexual impulses or sexual desires. A lot of people whole quit on the whole idea of chastity because they think sexual desire is lust. And
mm.
if I experience a sexual impulse, then oh, I just sinned. I just failed God.
Hmm.
I messed up again. I must not be holy. But those sexual reactions, as such, do not have an ethical value
Right.
attached to them. What we do with that reaction can be virtue or can be vice. And if young people don't understand that, they're going to fall into this endless scrupulosity
Hmm.
that ends up just leading into discouragement, despair, and then you just give up. And then you're just going to explode because you're just trying to repress all these desires in an unhealthy way. And so chastity isn't just a blind inhibition of these desires, but the acknowledgement of their power and then turning to God
Yeah.
in our own weakness, not just getting stronger and stronger, but more, if anything, realizing our weakness so we can rely on Him to love as we ought to.
As you've been out talking about all of this stuff, do you find that people are surprised when they find out that the key to chastity, to purity, is not repression of desire, but is rather
Mm,
an acknowledgement of this thing that I want, that I'm experiencing, but directing it in such a way that it becomes something that is a reflection of what's good and my capacity for self-gift and things like that. Do you find that they're surprised that they don't just have to repress their feelings and desires?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people think I have a hard job selling chastity, but it's like we have all the advantage in the world because, like, their hearts are made for love, their minds are made for the truth. Chastity offers them both, and they're marinated in such a bogus idea of love that when you just hold the real thing in front of them, it's like, yeah, that's what I want. Because like I'm binging out of like a dumpster, and then you hold the filet mignon in front of me. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna lose interest in that pretty quick. But
mm.
they don't get to see the real thing, or they think that if it does exist, they don't deserve it. I remember speaking at a Catholic high school in Santa Barbara years ago. And after the talk, a batch of these like popular looking, attractive high school girls come up with this big brown like lunch bag and they gave it to me in the parking lot. And I'm right next to the chaplain and the principal, and they're like, don't open this now. And I'm like, okay, and so I kind of just like held it, finished my conversation with the principal. Then I get to the airport. I'm like, dude, what's in this thing? And I open it up. I'm like, wow, it's this massive brown bag filled with contraceptives and a big long handwritten letter from the girls. And I, open up this letter and I start reading in it. It turns out these girls decided before the chastity talk that they were going to protest it. And so they said an idea, let's get condoms and let's put them on all the lockers and all the hallways, all over the locks, the padlocks, and everything. And then one of the girls like, no, let's protest after the talk so we can show how much we hated it. And the other girl's like, oh yeah, good idea. And then they said, after we heard your talk, we realized that the way we're living is not making us happy. Not only do we not want to protest it, we don't even want these contraceptives anymore. Here's them. Here's our morning after pill prescription. Here's our birth control pills. Here's this whole bag full of contraceptives that they didn't want anymore because they realized that they had just been sold a bill of goods, that they wanted love and they thought that chastity stood in the way of that. But when they realized, wait a minute, we're not getting loved by these guys on this campus. We're just being wanted for the
Yeah.
pleasure that we can give them. And so it was just such a liberating experience to have their eyes opened up, and then they didn't even want all these false promises of the world anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, praise God. It's a great story.
Yeah.
I was thinking while you were saying this too, that the purity seems to be more than just applicable to chastity, right? Like purity of heart is something that applies to all of those virtues. And so, I mean, I guess within the context of chastity, purity strengthens your will, right? So it's like, I saw this clip on, it was very timely for me. I was going on vacation to the beach with my family, and like a day before I was going on vacation, a clip of you, Mr. Evert, popped up on my phone because I use Instagram too much. And it was a video where you said, lust is a movement of the heart. And that definition, or you said lust is a movement of the will, right? Like it's an action you decide to take. So it's not strictly speaking a movement of the heart. It's not just that impulse. It's the decision to follow that impulse. And I think that's an empowering piece of knowledge too, right? Like if you're sold a bill of goods, and that could look like those contraceptives, but it could also just look like you should do this, like you should follow these impulses. The information that you don't have to and instead can choose not to. That's empowering information for young people. I mean, I know it was for me when, like I said, like and like this is recently, like I went to the beach and I was like, I was worried about it. I was like, there's going to be people wearing bikinis. I don't know about that. And then, your words of lust is the movement of the will. I was like, oh, I could choose to not lust. I mean, surely you need some purity of heart, but you can make the choice.
Yeah. So, I mean, we need to avoid the occasion of sin, avoid the location of sin as much as we're able to. But I mean, occasional sins are bound to come. I mean, this morning I dropped my kids off at school. Then I have like a 10-minute drive to the church for morning mass. And, I have to drive by this lake. And just today, it was like every 100 yards, there's another lady jogging in like what looks like their underwear. And it's just like, really, people? It's like every 100 yard, one, another.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, what do I do in that moment? You recognize beauty. There's a difference between seeing and looking. And so you just see it like, okay, what do I do there? Now, do I respond by looking 4 more times? Do I respond to like, thank you, God, for making her beautiful? May she be holy as your mother is holy. Let's get to church. So if we think that anytime I'm drawn in a sexually attractive manner towards someone, that we're just forever failing God, it's like, dude, I give up. This is over. But what lust is the reduction of the human person to their sexual value. And so it's like, okay, there's that invitation. Now, how am I going to respond? Do I need to respond with like this neurotic freak out? Oh, no, sex is bad. Sex is dirty. No. It's like, okay, God, thank you for making her beautiful. I hope you bless her today and that she can understand her value. And, maybe you could say a little prayer of contrition. One thing I recommend to guys is, okay, let's say you see a tempting sight, you have a pornographic flashback, and it could happen anytime. I mean, you could just be in mass and you get some image, where did that come from? Like, I didn't ask for that. I'm trying to focus here. Just stop. Don't freak out. Say, thank you, God, for making her beautiful. So the first movement of the heart is up, like the sign of the cross up. You could even make a little sign of the cross on your forehead. Thank you, God, for making her beautiful. Then the cross comes down. But God, I'm sorry for the times I've lusted after your daughters. Please give me a clean heart. Then the cross, you don't stay down in the shame. Just get up. And then off to the side, the cross goes. I think that of going to her. Okay, God, does she have a wedding ring? No, let's pray for a future vocation. Does she have a wedding ring? Let's pray for her and her husband. So you're transforming temptation into intercession. You're responding to the beauty of the body in love instead of lust. And then you leave her. And then you ask yourself, what's the ultimate beauty that I crave? Why is it every time I see a beautiful woman, there's this restless craving for something infinitely more? It's because she's just a fragment of the infinite beauty. In this book, this little meditation by John Paul, he calls women the last word of God. And it's like, whoa, like that was his final word in creation. And so there's something there that echoes this infinite yearning we have. And so we could kind of conclude our prayer by reminding ourselves what the beauty is we ultimately long for, the beatific vision. So this little exercise of, gratitude, contrition, intercession, thanksgiving, those are actually the 4 parts of prayer in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I taught a guy that once. And he came to me later. I said, man, that was a game changer for me. He said, I did that sign of the cross thing so much last summer. He said, I started developing acne in the shape of a cross on his forehead. And
Oh
I'm like,
man.
just use the side of your head. That might be better for your complexion. But just these little strategies so you're not going neurotic and you realize, hey, we're all in this together. We can win this.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you're talking about the things that you just see as you're driving down the road or something. Um, and good virtuous responses to that. I had this experience the other day. I was walking my dog, and as I'm walking through this neighborhood, there's a woman coming towards me with her dog, and she's attractive and dressed in exercise gear and stuff. And my concern wasn't her; it was her dog because she had one of those retractable leashes, and the dog was way way ahead of her, like 30 feet ahead of her. And my dog doesn't do super well with other dogs. And so I'm just concerned that he's going to see this dog and go crazy because there's a dog coming towards him. And so I'm like watching the dog, but I realized that it could look really easy like I'm just staring at her. And I started thinking to myself, I I'm recognizable in this neighborhood. I'm the priest from down the road here and everything. I don't want to seem like I'm creeping out people and like just looking at women and stuff. But at the same time, I really do have to be concerned about this dog. And I started to realize though, this is part of the damage that has been done by the way that we've fallen into sin, by just the nature of sin in our society, in our world, and then obviously on a personal level, right? That
Hmm.
this is now the kind of calculus that we have to do, that we have to think in this way. So
Mhm.
actually I was thinking about that as we were getting ready for this show today, because I was like, you've been doing this for a long time, Jason, spreading the good
Yeah.
news of chastity, teaching people what it really means. And you've done that with young people, you've done that with college students, you've done it with adults now. Um,
Yeah.
what have you found is sort of the biggest obstacle, maybe like top three obstacles to people receiving that good news and really living it out? And then what do you find are the best solutions to each of those obstacles?
Well, I think that one of the biggest challenges for the young people today is just this. I mean, the fact that they have endless possibilities on a screen in their pocket without any type of internet filter or accountability stuff put on there. I mean, I'd be dead meat if I was 14 years old and you gave me a cell phone with unfettered YouTube access and TikTok. I mean, I'd be minced meat. I mean, even neurologically, the capacity for controlling your impulses at that age is nothing what it is a decade later. And
Hmm.
so they're sitting ducks if we're just handing them a phone without a relationship, without filters. And so parents need to become kind of computer literate. I mean, some of these parents honestly don't even know how to open an email attachment. And their kids like hacking into the Pentagon's website for fun after school. It's like, catch up, folks, and it's hard because the teens have so much more time to find loop arounds on their phone. Oh, I could just create a VPN and I could do this. And the parents like, what's the VPN? And, so I mean, we've got to stay on top of this stuff. So resources for that in terms of solution to that, I like a Covenant Eyes is
Hmm.
good in terms of an accountability program. A Bark, BARK, is good for monitoring their text messages. So you can set the filters, like if there's anything having to do with violence or profanity or nudity or you'll just get an alert. And so you tell the kids, hey, this is going to go on your phone. I'm not going to see all your text messages, but if there are any red flags, those are going to get forwarded to me. Just let you know. So that way it's like, okay, I'm not spying on you, but if there's any legitimate red flags, we can have a
Mm.
conversation about those things showing up. So Bark is helpful. In terms of media consumption, I recommend pluggedin.com. That's by Focus on the Family. That'll give you movie, television, video game, and music reviews. So if your kid's like, Mom,
Hmm.
I want to buy a race car video game. Oh, go ahead. It's called Grand Theft Auto. It's really nice and wholesome. It's like, no, it's not. So you got to review the stuff. So whether it's movies, television, video games, music, pluggedin.com is a great resource for that. And so I think the screens is one of the biggest things of the confusion that they're going through, a gender, just a fake dopamine that they're trying to go after in
Hmm.
terms of these video games and everything else in the porn. That's, I think, kind of enemy number one. And the second threat is they have to see chastity lived in the family. Because if mom and dad are this assumption, okay, you need to practice abstinence for the next 10 years of your life, but I don't really have to listen to the church's teachings and sexuality in marriage because that's a wait until you're married thing. It's like, no, 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 no. Chastity is a virtue you have to practice inside of marriage, of not looking at pornography, the way you plan your family, listening to the church and not contracepting, sterilization, because your kids aren't always going to obey you, but they're never going to fail to imitate you.
Hmm.
And so if you want your kids to embrace the virtue of chastity, you have to live it. I mean, all the virtues are more easily caught than they are taught. And so this is why I think the family is so much under attack because ultimately it's the weapon. That's what the church has. It's the greatest weapon God has is the family. And so the family to me, it's like G.K. Chesterton said, is a cell of resistance to oppression.
Mm.
And so I think if we want to teach these kids these virtues, we have to practice them in our own life.
Mm, nice. Now, you point out a couple of these places of confusion, places of confusion about our sexuality, our identity, that come sometimes out of the influences that we're consuming, social media and things like that, but sometimes just ubiquitous in the world. Um, what do you find right now is the best way for us to respond to that confusion? Whether it's confusion about gender, sexual orientation, identity, these are big hot button issues right now that are really getting a lot of airtime. And as a church, we have a response. What's the best way for us to carry out and to bring that response to people that also respects the dignity of the person and brings compassion and love?
Well, I think the most important is live out your personal vocation of your call to holiness. I mean, this is not a culture war. This is a crisis of saints, is what the church is facing right now. Like that's what we need more of. Just people living this out in a heroic way in their day to day life.
Mm.
That's the most important thing. I remember the high school I went to, the theology department wasn't particularly strong, but one of the classes I went to in psychology, I just remember the teacher, the way that he would talk about his wife and kids. It just hit me as like a 17-year-old, 16-year-old kid, just listen to this guy. I mean, he loved it. Every time he talked about his wife and kids, he'd like start tearing up. And to me, it was like, he seems kind of over attached to his kids. I mean, what's going on over there? But it just kind of left this indelible mark on me. And he wasn't a theologian. He was just living out his vocation. So to me, that's the most important thing that we're really living it out on a day-to-day basis. And then when it comes to interacting with individuals who might not be on the same page as the church, realizing you're not always just supposed to be the mouth of Christ, because we see all these videos on YouTube and these shorts, watch this, conservative powerhouse crush this woke activist, trans crazy person, and, watch this debate. It's like, it's all this clickbait stuff. I
Mhm.
want to see
Yeah.
someone crushed in a debate. When it's like, that doesn't work in reality. In reality, you sit down, you have a coffee with the person. It's not, let me see how fast I can crush your ideology. It's like, no, tell me about your life. Let me listen to you. Let me be the ears of Christ to you, not just his mouth. Let me be the eyes of Christ, actually see you and recognize that you might have had a hard road and listen to you instead of just seeing you as a person that needs to be fixed, changed, and disproven. And so I think we need to lead in with the eyes and the ears, and then we'll deserve the right to be heard. And then we could be the mouth of Christ.
Yeah, well, how do you apply that specifically to a parent to a child, right? Like that seems to me to be probably like if you're a like a Catholic who really cares about the faith, and then you've tried to instill it in your children, and then your child falls victim to this kind of ideology. I can see, maybe it's just
Mhm.
me and my faults, right? I can see the angry response coming first, and I
Yeah.
recognize that wouldn't be the correct response, but um, so how should a parent approach this situation?
Yeah, well, I remember one mom, the daughter came up and the mom was like, "Mom, I'm non-binary and my pronouns are they and them." And the mom's like, "Okay, well, they need to go clean their room." And I just dropped it. And the kid's like looking for a fight. And the mom's like, whatever. And I don't recommend that approach
Right,
of just
yeah.
kind of just blowing the whole thing off. What I'd recommend is this. I talked to a high school girl once and she said, "I'm non-binary." And I told my mom and she freaked out at me and she started screaming at me. We got a big fight and I went in my room and I slammed my door. And I said, "Okay." I said, "We're going to do the conversation again. I'm going to be your mom. You're going to be you. And you're going to explain to me what you mean by non binary. But here's the catch: you're not allowed to say the word non binary. Now go." And the girl's like, "Okay. Well, I feel like I've always had to like what all the other girls like. And I've had to always do whatever the girls want to do. And sometimes I don't want to. And sometimes I just want to do what the guys are doing. And sometimes I don't feel at home with the pink dress and the little bows and talking about gossip. I would just rather do this or that." And I said, "Do you realize everything you just said to me? Your mom would just nod her head to it. Oh, I can totally understand where you're coming from. But you get the word non binary and you're replacing the story with a label. And so she's just getting tripped up by the label instead of hearing the story that's underneath it." And
Mhm,
so I think we've got to help the young people in a sense that we're listening to gender dysphoria with reverent curiosity. It
mhm,
is a roadmap to their healing, not in the sense of, okay, let's just lead wherever it takes us, but there's a story underneath here that often has some very profound, deep aches to it that need
Mm-hmm.
to be addressed, like
Yeah.
legitimate hurts that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking to one girl in the Pacific Northwest, and her sister just got a double mastectomy last February, and she's
Mm.
preparing for the operation. Her sister said to her, now, why are you doing this? Like, why are you going through the whole, bilateral mastectomy? And they had been abandoned by their dad as little girls. And the girl getting the surgery said to the sister, well, you'll see. She said, you'll see, I'll be a better I'll be a better man than dad ever was. And it's like, ooh, like there's layers here sometimes
Yeah.
of trauma and hurt, sometimes sexual abuse, where people are actually dissociating from their own bodies as a trauma response.
Mm-hmm.
And if we just look at like, no, you're not trans, that's a bunch of woke nonsense, you're just a snowflake. Yeah, good luck with that. Like you're not going to get anywhere, because then they're just going to run to their LGBT alliance group or whatever. And it's like, see, they get me, they understand me, they accept
Right.
whatever it is I want to do. And we've got to realize that, okay, we got to play the long game here. We're not in this for like a sprint to the finish, and we're just going to win it with a soundbite, perfect apologetic argument.
Yeah.
It's like this could take some time. It really could. And so we need to be in it for the long haul. And so yeah, there's going to be points of tension, where they're going to be like, no, I want you to use my pronoun. But, Pope Benedict once said something to the effect of, the truth may hurt, but it will never harm. And it's like, ooh, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. Like sometimes it might sting a little bit, but it's never going to harm us. Sometimes it has an antiseptic effect, like pouring hydrogen peroxide on a wound. You want to pull away, but there's a purification taking place. But we just got to be gentle how we're applying it, instead of just dumping the whole bottle of hydrogen peroxide on a wound that needs to be packed. It's like, okay, let's take some time, stop the bleeding, and then let's see how we can work walking one day at a time.
Yeah. Do you find that as these issues are becoming more commonplace, or just are talked about more, that even the pastoral response of the church is becoming a little bit more refined and more nuanced, in the sense that, like, I don't know, I would look and say, once upon a time, the primary focus was on the morality of this or that act, or this or that way of thinking.
Yeah.
And now it seems to me we just have a much greater awareness of human woundedness, and that some of these things, yes, there's the moral dimension of them that might be sinful. There's a moral dimension to this action or to this way of doing things that leads me away from God, that breaks my relationship with the Lord. But there's also this dimension of that it's an act that comes out of a wound. It's an act that comes out of a place of real brokenness in this individual's life, which, on the one hand, if you want to get into the moral theology, would diminish maybe their culpability, like how guilty are they of the sin. But maybe more important than focusing on the sin is focusing on the wound that person is suffering, to help them to find healing. And it's by helping them to find healing that you help them to turn away from the sin, whatever sin might be attached.
Yeah, and even secular experts are catching up on this. Over in England, the biggest gender clinic they had in the UK was the Tavistock Gender Clinic, which just got shut down last spring. And they had only ever audited the patients once. They did an audit of 125 incoming adolescent patients seeking transitional procedures, hormones, puberty blockers, surgeries. And what they found is 98% of the kids who wanted to transition had coexisting mental health conditions that needed clinical intervention. 98% of the kids had it was like a whole constellation of mental health issues, and gender dysphoria just happened to be one point on that constellation, not the cause of all of these other issues. And so 35 of the psychologists there actually quit because they weren't being allowed to explore these deeper psychological issues. They were just supposed to rubber stamp the kids as trans and give them their puberty blockers. And they were saying, no, that this isn't the answer. I mean, that what's called the Dutch protocol of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgery, they found was based on very low quality evidence. And so over Amsterdam, Finland, Norway, Sweden, France, UK, they're all reversing their procedures on this stuff and their protocols when it comes to puberty blockers for minors. They're changing it. And so we've got to realize, there's a lot more going on here. Now, we also need to be careful, though, that we're not making false promises to the effect of, hey, if we can just figure out what caused this, then it's all going to go away. I mean, it would be great if it worked like that, but sometimes it doesn't. You think of something like same-sex attractions, the way we spoke of that subject 15, 20 years ago. I mean, I read what I wrote back then, it's like, Yeah, that was the apologetic style of the times, but it lacked a lot of pastoral nuance. And so
Hmm.
we've really learned a lot over the years of how we can present the church's teachings in such a way that doesn't compromise the truth, but helps individuals to live in harmony with it. So we don't want to promise, oh, and also we don't want to do this like cookie cutter approach of like, oh, you have same-sex attractions, you must have a bad relationship with your dad.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
you want gender surgery, you must have been molested as a kid. Like, no, no, no. Everybody is unique. And so we can't take this cookie cutter approach because that does more harm than good. Nor can we make false promises of if we just get to the root, everything goes away. Because then what happens when we do discover the root and the dysphoria doesn't go away after a year or two and living in grace and pursuing God? So we've just got to be prepared to walk with these individuals and accompany them, knowing that God is making them saints in the process of these heavy crosses that they're carrying and can make us a saint in the process as well by accompanying them with truth and love.
Hmm.
Yeah, that the pastoral instruction to smell like your sheep
Mhm.
is invaluable. Um,
Yep.
do you think that some of those changes that are going on in Europe are heading towards America?
Yeah, with enough lawsuits, they will. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what's driving this whole thing is just money. I know of one woman who had detransitioned, and she added up her medical bills, and just for her alone, transitioning procedures, medical cost, hormones, added up to more than $1 million paid by insurance companies. A
Right.
million
Wow.
bucks for one single person. And so these things are going to shift. I just did a podcast that we released yesterday with an amazing Catholic attorney named Marcella Burke out of her law firms in Houston. She's representing the 3 whistleblowing cases in America right now against major hospitals
Mm.
that are fraudulently coding these medical procedures and illegally providing surgeries to people who they should not be. And
Wow.
so these are multi-billion-dollar lawsuits in the works right now. And so we had her on the podcast, and it was just an amazing episode where she's talking about these brave nurses and doctors are coming forward and being like, my hospital is doing a lot of illegal stuff, and I've been scared to death to speak up because I
Wow.
thought I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to have the FBI show up and raid my house, which has happened to some.
Hmm.
And so they're scared to death. But she's like, nope, the law is on your side. These hospitals are completely doing illegal things because they're using Medicaid and fraudulently coding these medical procedures, meaning, yeah, this person had a breast reduction surgery. It's like, no, this is not some cosmetic surgery. This was a top surgery for an adolescent who identified as non-binary. That's the wrong medical code. The right medical code is illegal because you can't do that in this state. And they're just fraudulently coding it. The nurses are calling them out. And we had enough brave nurses and doctors to come out of the woods. This thing's going to get shut down.
Wow.
Wow.
So I mean, you've been on this train for a long time. I don't know exactly how long you've been giving chastity talks, but
Yeah, 26 years.
26 years. I'm 27, so I just made the cut. Um, but did you see the trans movement coming like 10, 15 years ago? And further than that, what do you think is coming next that parents might want to like study up on?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm like a lot of other people. I didn't see it coming. It
Okay.
almost seemed like the whole Caitlyn Jenner thing was like, "Pfft, where did this come from?" And then,
Right.
then you look at it, it's like, oh, this is where it came from. There's a very logical progression in the sense that we had contraception, which basically began to blur our sexual differences
Mhm.
because now man and woman can engage in an act that's not intrinsically ordered towards procreation.
Right.
And from that, came the promiscuity, the sexual revolution. From that, we obviously had the abortion because now if we're having promiscuity and not expecting to get pregnant, we need to deal with the problem of the unexpected pregnancy. And from that, you have the same-sex marriage because look, if a man and a woman can engage in a sexual act that's not intrinsically ordered towards procreation, then how come 2 women can't do the same thing as well?
Mhm.
And so there was a logical progression there, further obscuring our sexual differences. And now this gender movement, there's a very reasonable cause of why these dominoes have fallen in this order, from contraception to promiscuity to abortion to same-sex marriage to transgenderism.
Mhm.
There's a reason this whole transgender thing didn't happen 20 years ago.
Hmm.
Same-sex marriage, that hurdle hadn't been cleared.
Mhm.
That domino had to fall, and then this one would be next. In terms of what's on the horizon, whether it's transhumanism or this or that, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah,
What
fair
I
enough.
do know is that I'm meeting more and more young people that are identifying, particularly females, as asexual. And what this is, for many of them, is kind of a trauma response
Mm.
of just like, 14-year-old girls of like, if that's what sexual intimacy is, what I saw on that cell phone from my classmate at the
Right.
eighth grade lunch table, if that's what I'm expected to do with a guy on my, count me out, I'm asexual. So it's kind of like a harbor from being objectified, declaring themselves asexual. But this isn't obviously the answer. I think of,
Yeah.
the devil wants people to share in his own misery because misery loves company. And you look at the portrayal of Satan in Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, and you'll notice he's an androgynous being, neither
Mm,
male nor female, just a genderless entity of sorts.
mm,
And it almost seems like he wants us to become in his image and likeness. And what the end game of this would be is to obscure our sexual complementarity, to kind of erase the the spousal meaning of the body. So to me, that's the end game. If God has stamped into our bodies, not only our identity as male and females, but our calling to find ourselves and the
mm.
giving of ourselves, and thus image the Blessed Trinity himself and make him visible on earth, well, then the devil's going to want to go right after that sign and erase it to wipe out and obscure the image of God on earth represented through our male-female union.
Right. And that representation is like, it's the obviously, like, there's the fecundity of it, which is like actually bearing fruit in children, right? But like,
Mhm.
even that's a symbol of bearing fruit in charity, period. Right. So
Yeah.
like, I think I mean, maybe it's me and my 27 years of age, right? But it's like, you're kind of blowing my mind insofar as like, to remove gender, right? Is kind of to remove that call to charity, right? Like,
Yeah.
like, the
Mhm.
devil's going after the call to love, period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because who's the natural counterpart to a genderless being? No one. And so
Right.
you're, in a sense, eternally and ontologically alone. But it is not good for man to be alone. And so God created a helpmate for man. And so we're created in the image and likeness of one who is love. But if my body does not point towards anyone else to make a gift of myself in love, then why would I even feel a call to the priesthood? Why would I feel a
Right.
call to make a gift of myself? Because, I can just exist as my own. But that's the definition of hell itself.
Yeah. I think with all of these great uh, great insights into the way that a distorted understanding of the human person, the way that the gender ideology and the errors of that movement start to isolate us and make us less who we are. What we're discovering is that the church's response is a more human response. It says this is what
Mhm.
it really means to be a human person, and if we're really in touch
Mhm.
with our humanity, we actually start to discover that we have at the deep core of who we are that capacity to love, to be loved, to give of ourselves, and that loving, being loved, and giving of ourselves is ultimately a far more satisfying way of living than being self-centered and focused inward. So what you see is people who are really striving for this integrated way of living tend to look really happy.
Mhm.
And people who are
Yeah.
stuck in this other stuff tend to feel very angry, or tend to
Yeah.
seem like they're not really all that happy about things.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you go out
No,
and
I
you're
think you're getting.
go ahead, Jason. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no, you're getting really to the core of John Paul's thought that, lust isn't just something we shouldn't do. Like, lust isn't who we are, because if I'm made in the image and likeness of God, and God is love, I'm made in the image and likeness of love. So if I'm lusting or using, I'm acting contrary to my very nature. I'm not just like breaking a commandment, I'm breaking myself upon that commandment. And you look at, like you said, people that are happy, sainthood is like the full bloom of the human personality. You look at the most ununique people, and it's just the worst sinners. I mean, look at these prisons they have in El Salvador, like 100,000 men in a prison, all tatted up and bald. Like, they literally look like clones. Look at Al Qaeda. Look at, like, sex trafficking, people, like, whatever. I mean, they literally look like clones of each other.
Hmm.
And then you look at the communion of the saints and the Mother Teresa's and the Joan of Arcs and the Louis de Montfort's and Francis and Per Giorgio and Jean Paul. Like, they're so intensely unique because sainthood is just a full bloom of the human personality. That's why I can't be Mother Teresa. I mean, I would literally be a fraud if I just thought, okay, I need to be like that. It's
Hmm.
like, no, that's not my path for sanctity. My path is to be most uniquely who God created me to be as Jason. And then that's what I need. And that's what the church needs. And there's going to be joy lived out in that vocation. And so, yeah, I mean, you're spot on. Those who are living in harmony with who they are going to have the most peace, and that peace is going to be evident. You think of like John Paul II. I mean, I got to see him 24 times in my life,
So
and the
cool.
weight of that man's presence was so thick. I
Yeah.
mean, he would drive by you and it would be like, ugh, like you would feel like it was like this rare earth magnet passing by these
Mm.
little fragments of steel. Everything would want to clump on. And it was just, he had this weight to his interior life. He could literally just drive by in the pool and be like, I need to pray more than I do.
Yeah.
He would just have,
Yes, it's true.
because he was who he was supposed to be. Yeah.
Yeah. I got to meet him once, and uh, as I took his hand, I remember the grip that he had. He was so frail. He was everything else about him physically was breaking down, but his hand was so strong. And I wanted to say all these things to him, thanking him for his example and for his priesthood and for what he had done to inspire my vocation. And I found myself just going, ah, there's nothing there. I couldn't do anything. It was wild. Okay. Um, I know that we've got to let you go here soon, but I really quickly, a lot of the the discussion surrounding chastity and surrounding gender and all this stuff and the things that you'll be presenting when you come here in October, we can often phrase it in terms of I'm responding to the error that's being presented by the world. And
Mhm.
there's a certain value, of course, to responding to an erroneous way of thinking. But there's also this tremendous good news and beautiful message that we have that we can share with the world. And so if
Mhm.
we start from that perspective, that the church has something great to teach and to share, where do you begin and how do you like to phrase it? And really, how then should how should the church's ministers or priests be responding to that?
Yeah, at the end, the church's teaching on human sexuality is not a defense. It's a proclamation. It's a
Mhm.
part of the gospel. I mean, the best image you could think of this is in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18. Jesus takes the apostles to Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi is really out of the way. It's like 38 miles, I think, away from Capernaum. And so it's like, okay, why is Jesus dragging them all the way, walking them like 38 miles to this place? Well, Caesarea Philippi, I'd always heard, well, there's a big rock there, so Jesus stood in front of the rock and said, hey, Peter, your rock, and on this rock I'll build my church. And I just always thought, oh, well, that's cool. It's a nice visual aid, but there's lots of big rocks around the Sea of Galilee. He could have done the teaching there. Why Caesarea Philippi? Well, Caesarea Philippi was basically the kind of headquarters where a shrine was to the Greek god Pan. This was the god that had like goat legs and the body of a
Hmm.
man
Hmm.
and goat horns, god of fertility and the wilderness and all this stuff. And there were, sacrifices going on, animal sacrifices, human sacrifices, different rituals that were not pure, all going on in this spot. So Jesus shows up here, which it's basically a satanic temple, is what this is. And he just shows up to ruin the party and says, you, Peter, are this rock, and on this rock I'm going to build my church. Now, on top of the rock was an actual temple to Pan. In the rock was this big gaping hole, which was known as the gate of Hades or the gate of hell. And it was this cave that a well would come out of. And they believe that spirits can enter in and out of that cave. It was kind of the gate of hell. And so Jesus stands in front of this and says, you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now, what's really interesting about this is at this same time, there's a Greek historian that said that there were some Greek fishermen and their boat arrived on shore. And when they arrived on shore, they were mourning and lamenting because they had a vision out at sea that the great god Pan was dead. And now this is interesting because Paul didn't set foot to Greece for decades later, but this vision apparently happened during the reign of Caesar Augustus Tiberius, which was the time that Christ would have been at this shrine. You have Greeks saying he's dead, which is weird because Greek gods don't die. They're immortal, but they were weeping because Pan was dead. And what I get the most out of this passage is if we read it carefully, we've always read it backwards. We always think that the passage says that, hell will not prevail against the gates of the church. No. It says the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Now, you read this in the right direction. Gates are a defensive structure. Nobody gets attacked by a gate. Okay, so it's the church that is on the offensive, and the gates are not going to be withholding this offensive march from the church and the gospel. Instead of the church has the gates, and the hell is not going to beat down our gates, and we can kind of hide in Helm's Deep like Lord of the Rings,
I was
know,
gonna
until
say,
morning
that's why
comes and
Aragorn leads them to Mordor to fight, to go right to the gate. Yes, yes.
Gandalf will come, just kind of hold out until morning.
For Frodo!
It's like, no. Yeah, the church is the opposite. The hell is the one kind of bunkered down, and the church is the one storming against it, and the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Not that hell won't prevail against the gates of the church. And so this vision that Christ gives us, so beautiful. It's like, look, I'm taking over. This is over. We're marching. And he says in Mark, unless the strong man is bound up, his goods are safe, unless someone stronger than him comes and binds up, and then he can plunder his goods. In that passage, the strong man is the devil, but one stronger than him comes, plunders him, and then takes his goods. And so Christ, the strong man in the church, is coming to plunder Satan and his kingdom and take back his goods, which is all of our souls. And so that's the vision of the Catholic Church. And if you believe anything less than that, you haven't been taught the gospel yet.
I believe the word we're looking for is amen.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, this is great.
Blessing to be on.
So you'll be here in the Diocese of Bridgeport at St. Rose of Lima Church in Newtown, Connecticut on October 10th, giving this presentation. Tell me again the title of the presentation.
Yeah, the event is called Purified, and so I'll have two talks. One, the chastity talk, the second one on the subject of gender. But you can get tickets for the event at chastity.com. And like I said, 13-year-olds and up, everybody's invited to come. We will have a link for it in the show notes. Jason Evert, thanks so much for your work, for everything that you're doing. It's great to have you on. Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
I don't know all the time.
Hey, that was fun. You know what I liked
great.
about that one was that we didn't have the tech issues that we had with Crystalina.
Yeah, sure. Huge win.
Huge
win.
But
I'm just glad they fixed their internet, like for their sake.
Yeah.
And that must have been a huge pain in the butt.
I'm the problem with the internet connection right now. But
you've always been the problem. No,
I know. I'm sorry. Did you feel a little bit of like a full circle? All right. So now we've closed the loop. We've had the Evert family on, as it were.
Yeah. I was just personally excited that Jason was coming on. Is really what it was.
Yeah, sure.
He's had such a profound impact upon the understanding of chastity. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, on your generation and on mine, like for years now. He is just like, he's been the guy. And so to get to talk to him about such a prevalent issue and ask questions, particularly from the standpoint of parents, like I was really excited to do that. So he was really becoming a voice when I was in like my first years of seminary. I think he might have, he's a few years older than me. And so I think he might have been starting out even when I was still in high school, but his voice was so unique because he was this young man. And like at the time that he first started writing and first started kind of getting his name out there and doing these presentations and stuff, he and Crystalina weren't married yet. Oh,
and
really?
So there was this.
See, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. So he was this like really young, cool guy. He's still a young, cool guy. Let's say that he's not old. He's this young, cool guy who's out there, and with this enthusiasm and joy and authenticity, he's presenting what the church teaches about human life and human sexuality and what a gift it is. And it was such a different way of hearing it.
Yeah.
And really what he was doing, he was taking John Paul II. And
fair enough.
Applying John Paul II's message of theology of the body and the goodness of the human person to an American context that desperately needed to hear that kind of good news. But it was so different than the way that most presentations about chastity had been done in the past that it was really something very, very unique. So I was always really grateful to hear from him. And it's been fun watching. And then, like I said, when we interviewed Crystalina a long time ago, it was like, I feel like that was 2 years ago. I don't think it was actually 2 years ago.
It was pretty close.
It was
I mean, this actually, I have to check, but this might have been our 100th episode.
Well, if this was our 100th episode, go back and check, because then we need to do an intro about our 100th episode, just in case we don't know how many episodes we've recorded, which we have absolutely no idea how many episodes we've recorded. Just in case you're wondering.
It's up there.
Our
we might have missed our 100th episode.
Extravaganza. Yeah, we probably did at this point.
We're celebrating our 103rd episode.
Well, I think next week we don't have a guest, so it's just you and me recording.
It's just you
so
and
we can celebrate our 100th anniversary, our 100th episode.
Our 100th anniversary.
Oh man. But really, just to bring it all back, like what I also loved was interviewing Jason and keeping in mind our conversation with Kristalina all that time ago. What I'm
Mhm.
just seeing is how complementary they are to one another.
Yeah.
Like their particular enthusiasm, their gifts, and the joy that they have. I I kind of like just want to hang out with them
Yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah.
watch
Dinner
them
at
be
the Everett
complementary to one
house is
another.
probably fun.
Yeah, but I just want to like spend time with them and see that complementarity actually in the flesh, because you can just see
Hmm.
how well they must go together. That's a great thing to be able to see from a distance. I love that.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm. Totally.
but really looking forward to this event on October 10th. I'm going to do my best to make it there, and you
Same.
should too.
Me as well.
Check out the show notes.
I too.
All right. Thanks,
All
man.
right. Thanks, Father Sam.